Pose 322. Study Session 7. Key Figures of Pan-Africanism. Introduction. This lecture takes off from where the last one stopped, by focusing on the specific contributions of key Pan-African exponents. Those discussed here include James Hutton, James Johnson, Edward Blyden, George Padmore, and William Du Bois. The lecture also briefly examines the role of the first generation of African post-colonial leaders. Learning outcomes. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to outline the contributions of key writers and political activists to Pan-Africanism as an idea and as a movement. And lastly, identify each of the figures considered below and its contributions to Pan-Africanism. Key figures in Pan-Africanism. The key figures, as indicated before, include the following: James Africanus Bill Hutton. James Hutton was born in Sierra Leone in 1835 to an Igbo ex-slave and educated in Sierra Leone and England. He was a surgeon, scientist, soldier, and a political thinker who worked towards African independence a century before it occurred. He received a War Office scholarship in 1853 to study medicine in Britain. While a student, he took the name Africanus as an emblem of pride in his African homeland. In his writings, he celebrated the African past and painted a glowing picture for the African future. In his West African countries and peoples, for instance, he argued that in the past, Africa was the nursery of science and literature, and the source of Greek and Roman science and literature. He pointed out that Africans were made up of stern stuff and therefore tended to succeed in the most difficult circumstances. Looking to the future, he argued that the pendulum of change, which for him was a permanent thing, was bound to swing again in Africans' favor. As he puts it, nations rise and fall. The once flourishing and civilized degenerates into a semi-barbarous state, and those who have lived in utter barbarism after a lapse of time become the standing nation. For him, Africans must therefore live in the hope that in process of time their turn will come, when they will again occupy a prominent position in the world's history, and where they will command a voice in the Council of Nations. As you would have noticed, Hutton's unit of analysis was basically the entire African continent, in leading the call for a restoration of self-confidence of the black people of the world. He helped to bring about an intellectual environment conducive to the rise and sustenance of Pan-Africanism. James Johnson. Johnson was a contemporary of Hutton, born also in Sierra Leone but of Nigerian parentage. Educated at Farah Bay, his contributions were limited to the religious plane. A priest of the CMS, he nevertheless waged an unrelenting battle for the formation of independent African churches to service the spiritual needs of the African personality. He condemned the practices in existing churches, which to him were too foreign and un-African. For him, the African must be raised upon his own idiosyncrasies. Edward Wilmot Blyden. Also of Igbo parentage, Blyden was born in a West Indian island in 1832. It is to Blyden that is often given the credit of being the first articulate and original proponent of Pan-Africanism until his death in 1912. He wrote against racial prejudices and racist conceptions of blacks and Africans, calling, like Johnson, for the Africanization of Christianity. He was the first to use the concept of African personality and to call for the promotion of same. He had a vision of a glorious African future and warned against the danger of continued disunity in Africa. He advocated for an independent West African university to be solely run by Africans, as well as the teaching of African languages and cultures and values in school. On racial prejudices, Blyden argued that the lonely nature of the African compared to the European was not because of any essential difference existing in their nature, but only on account of differing circumstances. He condemned Europeanized Africans who argued for full African enculturation in European society and for the loss of what Blyden called the African personality. For Blyden, such an argument is very much unwise. This is as wise or as philosophical as to say, let us do away with gravitation, with heat and cold and sunshine and rain. Of course, the race in which these persons would be absorbed is the dominant race, before which in cringing self-surrender and ignoble self-suppression they lie in prostrate admiration. For him, the need to preserve and promote the African personality has religious, political, and economic implications. At the religious level, it involves Africanizing the church. At the economic level, it calls for complete autonomy and self-help. At the political level, it involves the development of an African nationality that would discourage disunity, which Blyden saw as the bane of Africa and the source of its powerlessness. According to him, we need some African power, some great center of the race, where our physical, pecuniary, and intellectual strength may be collected. We need some spot where such an influence may go forth on behalf of the race. So long as we remain this divided, we may expect impositions. So long as we live simply by the sovereignty of the nations, we must expect to be subject to their caprices. George Padmore. George Padmore was born in Trinidad in 1902. Padmore converted from communism to Pan-Africanism, following his belief that communism did not fully address the problems and grievances of black communities. For him, therefore, Pan-Africanism was the ideological key to the solutions of the problems of Africans and blacks of African descent outside the continent. In a concise statement, he argued that in our struggle for national freedom, human dignity, and social redemption, Pan-Africanism offers an ideological alternative to communism on the one side and tribalism on the other. It rejects both white racialism and black chauvinism. It stands for racial coexistence on the basis of absolute equality and respect for human personality. According to him, Pan-Africanism looks above the narrow confines of class, race, tribe, and religion. In other words, it wants equal opportunity for all, talent to be rewarded on the basis of merit. His vision stretches beyond the limited frontiers of nation-states. Its perspective embraces the federation of regional self-governing countries and their amalgamation into a United States of Africa. In such a commonwealth, all men, regardless of tribe, race, color, or creed, shall be free and equal, and all the national units comprising the regional federations shall be autonomous in all matter regions, yet united in all matters of common interest to the African Union. This is our vision of the Africa of tomorrow, the goal of Pan-Africanism. William Edward Du Bois, a black American sociologist. He was born in 1868 in the American Northeast area, Massachusetts, and died in 1963. He devoted a lot of his scholarly energies to refuting anti-black racist perspectives in the United States and to study the objective conditions of American blacks. He considered Africa as a victim of Western capitalism and helped in organizing Pan-African congresses. The first of such congresses was held in Paris in 1919, and Du Bois was the major driving force for the Pan-African movement embodied in these congresses in the 1920s. Although the Congress went into decline in the period up to 1945, it was revived again by Du Bois in 1945 in a context in which the nationalist movement and the anti-colonialist struggle in the Third World was reaching greater heights. Du Bois' contributions are therefore more notable in the area of transforming the Pan-African idea into a movement and in organizing the black communities worldwide for political action. I cannot end this lecture without pointing to the developments from the 1940s. Emerging African leaders of the first generation did pledge themselves to some form of Pan-Africanist union or the other. For instance, Kwame Nkrumah, first leader of independent Ghana, noted succinctly that there is strength in the political unity of our continent, and that is why the Convention's People's Party, as the vanguard for African liberation, is always against any policy for the balkanization of Africa into small, weak, and unstable states. we believe that considerations of mutual security and prosperity of our people demand that all the independent states in Africa should work together to create a union of African states. So deep is our faith in African unity that we have declared our preparedness to surrender the sovereignty of Ghana, in whole or in part, in the interest of a union of African states and territories as soon as ever such a union becomes practicable. Although the name given to the regional organization formed by independent African states in the first decade of their attaining sovereign status, the Organization of African Unity, formed in 1963, bears testimony to some yearning for continental union on the continent. The fact is that many of the leaders of such countries find it difficult to surrender part or all of their sovereignty they struggle so hard to get from the colonial masters for some notion of continental unity. Therein lies the paradox of Pan-Africanism, its instability to overcome the divisive centrifugal pool of sovereignty, with these emphases on the centripetal factors conducive to continental unity. Study session summary. In spite of it having consistently put forward the argument for unity, Pan-Africanism remains an idea whose realization appears not to be in sight, thanks in part to the resilience of consideration of sovereignty by leaders of Africa's many and often weak nation states. End of study session 7. Thank you for listening.